Hey YouTube, I'm your host Kurt Brown. This is The Watch Factor and you're in the news. In today's episode, I want to take a look at an upcoming release that's scheduled by our friends Baltic, who have decided to come out with another chronograph, but this time one that has received a little bit of criticism because of its style design. Let's talk about it today in the news. Now, Baltic, as of late, has been really knocking it out of the park with a number of their different watch designs that they've released over 2022. And it's no surprise that they're still sticking with that same outlook of leveraging vintage-inspired designs as it relates to their latest release. This is the Tri-compax chronograph that has a reverse Panda and a standard Panda as the two options to select. Now, right now, I believe they're using their standard approach of this is a limited run, not a limited edition, that is scheduled to keep the window for pre-ordering through December 11th. I believe it's going to be a release of 200 pieces in the reverse and 200 pieces in the standard Panda. But as of late, as you look through some of the commentary that started to float around on the internet and social media, there's a lot of criticism out there, and I want us to kind of have a little dialogue about it. First, some people have brought up the fact that they feel like it's just too close to the Paul Newman Daytona, that the aesthetic and the dial design just looks too close to the point where one might say, is this another copy or just trying to emulate that too much? And then on the flip side, some people have said, hey, does it make sense to pay in excess of $1,600 for a watch that's not from, a well-known Swiss-made brand with regards to the fact that they're a micro brand and they do very limited type of runs? Let's continue to talk about it and take a look here. So I'll start with some of the basics. Let's go through the specifications just so that we align on what's all coming in the package. We're talking about a traditional steel case, an aluminum tachymeter bezel, a double dome sapphire crystal. The watch is going to be sized at around 39.5 mm by 47. Your lug width is 20 millimeters, thickness is 13.5. Now, historically in the past, there's been variations of watches that did not come with Swiss movements. We've seen Miyota movements and other Seiko-based movements that have been in a lot of their watches, but in this case, this comes with a Swiss manual wound movement, a Solita, I think the reference is SW510M. It has a 63-hour power reserve. And the overall dial, at least in the traditional Panda, it's going to be kind of a soft tone, kind of aged beige, if you will. There is an engraved crown. It's water resistant to 50 millimeters. And on the back, it is a closed case. However, the first 200 will be engraved with a number so that you know if you have anywhere between 1 to 200. Now, my initial review of the watch is that aesthetically it's very well proportioned and it's a very impressive watch. To the first challenge of it being like a Paul Newman, I think we have gotten to this space, especially watch collectors and folks who are aware of the hype around Rolex, understand the importance and the impact that Rolex has had on the watch industry. I think we kind of tend to assume that any watch that has any type of comparison or any type of design element that kind of gives a nod to them or kind of feels like them, you assume that it's a copy. And in my review of the watch, that's just not the case. And why do I say that? It's because we have to understand that although Rolex may be the first in a lot of areas, the use of the style design of the Panda or the reverse Panda, Rolex wasn't the first. There were a lot of different brands that looked at that as a great way to provide the type of readability that you need it for in a racing or a tool watch, if you will. And so even as you look at some of these examples here from Universal, you can see that the wide variety of variations that existed back in the 60s or even earlier dates than that. And so it's kind of a realization to understand that not everything is even a homage. There was a wide breadth of watch manufacturers out there that were using that type of design aesthetic to apply to their watches. And so as I look at what Baltic has done, I think the way they choose to look at the different types of font selections that they apply, the variation in the hand designs that they use in the sub registers, and then still using things like the pump pushers, but maybe not having screw down pushers and things like that. It's just a great way of making sure that that argument is really null and void. Staying away from things like additional red lettering down at the 6 o'clock right above the register. Staying away from any additional wording right below 12, and then actually choosing to apply a 12 number at 12 o'clock instead of just having a traditional style of an indice. So I really like the fact that they kind of decided to kind of challenge themselves by making sure that they weren't too close from a Paul Newman design or anything like that. But again, overall, I feel like the watch at 39.5 millimeters is perfect. I love the fact that they chose to go ahead with a manual wound movement and exceed standards of what we normally would expect for a watch that might come in just shy of $2,000. At well over 60 hours of power reserve for a manual wind, that's pretty impressive. Even if it might be from Sellita and maybe not Etta or another brand, which I think just helps balance it out. The bracelet being double finishing of a polish and a brush just bodes well with the overall look of the watch, and I think it just positions the watch perfectly. Whether you like the Panda or the reverse Panda, you kind of can't go wrong here. If I was to give a criticism to the watch, I think the fact of going with the aluminum, which again still nods back to the vintage style, it just leaves out room for a potential scratch or a scuff mark that you can't take out, that you've got to send in. And I would have just liked to see them potentially try ceramic, just as another way to ensure that the watch would be able to stand the test of time a little bit and just avoid the possibility of a scratch. But again, with this being a watch that's all about kind of giving a tribute to the golden era of racing, the 60s, and things like that, I can understand why you chose to it. But you know, me being picky, I would have just wanted to just ensure that little piece would have been in place. Let's talk a little bit about the price. The reality is that when you think about a Swiss-made watch, regardless of the movement, whether we're talking about a traditional Valjoux 7750 or one of Etta's 2428-2s, when you talk about Swiss-made watches that have a chronograph complication, you tend to, of a certain quality, you tend to think about watches that are going to exceed into the 2000s and potentially even higher. I think the position of Baltic right now is that I feel as if Baltic is challenging itself to see where the market is. And so the fact that they're coming in at this kind of unique space of $1,600+, I think they're testing the market to see, you know, are their fan base the type that will spend this kind of money. We saw earlier the release of their chronograph with Peter Otto, which was a really great success, but was interesting that watch was in excess of $2,000. And so I think they are still testing the waters on where they can push their fan base and the collectors that seem to follow the type of design aesthetics that they produce, and so forth. So I think it's actually a great price. Of course, I would love to see it, you know, below sub $1,000, kind of in the breadth of what they did with the MR01 lineup. But again, to have that chronograph movement, for it to be Swiss made, to be a manual wind, I can understand the justification of kind of raising that bar slightly above $1,000 and kind of just seeing and testing the waters. It makes me wonder what's next to come. If we zoom out a little bit and think about, okay, so you've done your reverse Panda, you've done your Panda style chronograph, where do we go next? Do we look at potentially a moon phase? Do we look at a triple calendar? Something that was also coming from the vintage era. You know, I'd be curious to see where they go next, but I think the overall execution of this watch is done very well. Again, I think kudos to Baltic on just sticking to their DNA of what they position themselves as, challenging, but also making sure that the naysayer doesn't really have a foot to stand on. I myself am interested to see if I'll be one of the lucky ones to get one of these on the wrist. And if you happen to be one of the folks that are slated to, I believe the first batch is going to be released in April of 2023, and then somewhere between August and September of 2023. So we've got a little while. I still don't quite understand why some brands who do the pre-ordering require you to wait so much. Maybe they're trying to see what type of demand there is. But again, at a limited run of 200, 400 altogether, I would have loved to have seen some of these watches show up on the wrist as a part of Christmas of 2022. But be it as it may, I'm not a watch producer, and so I too have to wait and see what happens. But I'd love to know what you think. Do you feel like price point was right? Do you feel like the design was far enough but close enough to really command this type of price point? Do you like the bracelet design, the double finishing? Do you feel like the dial was the right balance of legibility and uniqueness that makes Baltic kind of what they are? So I'd love to hear your feedback. Drop me a comment. To those that are new to the channel, if you haven't, please subscribe. We are a watch community that's constantly trying to grow, and I'd love to hear from you and know what your thoughts are. So until next time, take care, everybody.